Keisha, and this is my ASMR channel, and in today's video, we are on day 7 of the Monster Mash Marathon, and today we are talking about Dingess Tunnel and Dingess, West Virginia at large, but specifically Dingess Tunnel. So, Dingess Tunnel is on Dingess Road in Dingess, West Virginia. And West Virginia culture is rooted a lot in Appalachian culture. And its Appalachian heritage is characterized by a strong sense of community, traditional Appalachian music and crafts, and a rich history tied to the coal mining industry and distinct cuisine. Um, so Appalachian culture in general is influenced by Native American, African American, and European culture. It takes on Native American traditions and the love or preservation of the land. Specifically, this manifests as like a connection to the mountains because West Virginia is located on like the Appalachian Mountain Range, which is, I'm pretty sure, the oldest mountain range in the United States. Let's see. Yeah, the Appalachian Mountains are actually the oldest in all of North America, not just the United States. Um, yeah, they were once as tall as the Rocky Mountains, but because of how old they are, over 480 million years old, when they were formed, they've like worn down over time, and they're more hilly, but the people there have a deep connection to the mountains. Um, it was influenced by European culture through the European settlers, particularly Irish and Scottish, who brought their musical traditions. And I think this includes like the banjo and things like that, which are popular in Appalachian culture. And it was influenced by African American culture, visible in its blues style music and other cultural aspects. Other aspects of Appalachian culture include folk music and art. This included things like the fiddle, the banjo, and the mountain dokomer, I believe is how it's pronounced. And it's kind of like a banjo type of guitar type thing, but it has a really hourglass shape. Like it's very oh, literally. But it doesn't have many strings from the picture I'm looking at. I think maybe it only has 2 or 3 strings. But yeah, it's an interesting shaped banjo type of thing that does not have a lot of strings. Another aspect of their culture, I think the folk music and the art is heavily influenced from like the Irish and Scottish culture, but I think some of the crafting, such as the quilting and basket weaving, are influences from African American this day, a lot of people who live in the mountains stay there because they had ancestors who moved there to be a part of like the coal mines and things like that. So getting more into Dingess Tunnel. This tunnel was built, um, one source said Italian immigrants, and another source said African American and Chinese immigrants. So we're just gonna say immigrants. Um, this tunnel was built by immigrants in 1892 as part of the Norfolk and Western Railway's 12-pole line. It is 3,331 feet long with a natural airflow ventilation and a drainage ditch along the east side of the tunnel. It was built using stone, and a portion of it was originally lined in timber. So yeah, it's like almost a mile long, stretched out, really dark. It has now been open to like one lane vehicular traffic, but it's a dark tunnel. All sources say be sure to check for headlights before entering the tunnel and at all times while driving through the tunnel because it's only one singular lane and there's no lights in the tunnel to mitigate traffic. And from what I read, I'm not sure if there are lights in the tunnel at all. I know that there's no traffic lights, but I don't think that there are lights like in the tunnel at all, which is a little scary for a dark one-lane tunnel. As well as being dimly lit, the tunnel has a dark history and is often known as Bloody Mingo. So, in days past, Dingess, West Virginia, earned the reputation for being one of the lawless spots inland. Rumor has it that it wasn't uncommon for this small community to have a killing once a month. Yeah, it was a really small mountain town. It was pretty secluded. Hence the one lane tunnel that leads there. And it was a really lawless place. I feel like when places are really secluded, it leads to them being lawless because there are criminals everywhere, but certain criminals in certain areas understand like no one is coming to save people. So if they feel as if no one is coming or it will take someone too long to get there, it leads to like a lawless type of situation. Because yeah, the crime could have been committed and covered up and everything before anyone can really be there to figure it out. So this lawlessness only continued to attract people who were like grifters or from the underworld lifestyle, and the area's inhabitants didn't think of reforming this behavior because it has become such a custom in their way of life there. And I mean, what I mean by that is like they were this hostile environment where everyone needed to be so tough. So then violence becomes a part of the community and nobody thinks twice about it. Lawlessness becomes a part of the community and that all just becomes ingrained into society in a way that people don't think anything is wrong with it. Therefore, they don't think that they need to change or reform anything about it. And that's what's happening here. So it's a really lawless place where everyone just kind of accepts its lawlessness. Um, so the inhabitants of Dingo just kind of think of its lawlessness as a custom in their way of life. They don't think too much of it. Like, it's always been that way. So, you know, from 1900 to 1972, at least 17 law enforcement workers were killed in this area's region. They were shot to death while attempting to keep order. That's what it said on like a website that was like things to know about West Virginia or something like that. But yeah, between these years, like 17 law enforcement officers just in this small region were killed or shot to death in order to keep order. And it wasn't just Dingess because the tunnel ended at Dingess, but it stretched through this area called Mingo County, hence the name Bloody Mingo being the name of the tunnel. But it wasn't just Dingess that was like lawless, it was like a bunch of little lawless villages all around in this one community. So in the neighborhood Matawan, also in Mingo County, there was an enormous shootout between outlaws and lawmen resulting in many deaths, and this was known as the Matawan Massacre. So this was a deadly shootout in a mining city between the law enforcement hired by the mining companies to watch over the miners and the miners who were tired of mistreatment and poor pay. And this is what I mean when I say like even the people that came originally to this place for a better opportunity, which they thought they would find by mining in the coal mines, it was a really rough situation and the miners were mistreated. They were basically treated like slaves. They were like underpaid and overworked, and they were policed by these law enforcement officers who weren't like government appointed. They were hired by the mining companies to basically act as overseers and make sure that the miners are making quota, not stealing, etc., etc. But people with positions of power tend to abuse their power. So that would be a recurring problem between the mining law enforcement and the miners, where the law enforcement would abuse their powers. And eventually the miners, they got tired of it and they had an uprising against the law enforcement, and that was dubbed the Matawan Massacre. Yeah, so, and to make this lawlessness doubly tragic, much of it was racially motivated as well as it was like class motivated. Like the mining officer miners thing was very like class and social standing motivated, whereas the things we're about to get into were like tragedies that suffered some of the worst abuse. They would often face hostile locals waiting at either end of the tunnel with guns, ready to shoot anyone who looked different than their homogeneous local population. Um, or these outlaws would ambush your train and do the same with any outsiders among the passengers. So in addition, I watched a video of a guy who took a trip to Dingess. And yeah, there were black people not in Dingess because they specifically said they would not go through the tunnel and they would not go to Dingess out of concern of being surrounded. But which is crazy in 2025. But they were telling stories about how people said that the villagers and the townspeople would stand on top of the opening of the tunnel with their rifles and they would shoot down into the train at the immigrants that were coming into the city, which that's insane, but that is another contribution to the name Bloody Mingo. In 1819, as well as like the problems with the lawlessness and the shootouts happening because it was just like Wild West, and then the racially motivated things, and then the bloodbaths between the miners and the law enforcers. What else attributed to the name Bloody Mingo were the actual train wrecks that occurred in the tunnel. So, in 1898, a fatal train wreck in the tunnel killed 7 people. But this was just not a widely reported event. The only thing known about it is that it was a train derailment and it resulted in the death of 7 people. And that's it. But then again, a few years later, in 1905, there was a head-on collision that occurred between a freight train and a work train coming opposite ways down the tunnel, and that resulted in the death of 3 people. That happened in June of 1905, and other than that, there's not many reports on that either. But I believed at that point it was thought that this tunnel was like too dangerous for it to be like railroad operable. So by 1913, the tunnel was inactive for rail traffic and people began traveling through the tunnel by horse, buggies, and eventually cars. When the road lines were torn up and then a road deck was paved over the train tracks. But that is Dingess Tunnel on top of its bloody history. A lot of people now report that the tunnel is haunted. I've heard stories of people say they hear screams in the tunnel. I've heard people say like they drove through the tunnel once, they won't drive through the tunnel again. I feel like the death in the tunnel is greatly underreported, and there were probably a lot of lives lost in the making of the tunnel, all of the violence in the community. That there are a lot of souls probably trapped there, but this is probably one of many stories that we're gonna get into that involve the Appalachian Mountains. That is like a super creepy place where a lot of weird, subscribe.